Seattle is a city where we strengthen existing protections and we create systems of support for people who are seeking abortion care. The fight for reproductive justice will continue, and I will be supporting these fights at every level that I can.
That's Councilmember Tammy Morales, one of many members of the Seattle City Council, sponsoring legislation to protect women coming to our city for abortion. So what are the battlefields for that legal fight ahead here and across the country? Plus, with a series of public forums starting this week, what is Seattle looking for in the search for a permanent police chief? And if you love Seattle parks, raise your hand and keep them raised. If you're ready to see taxes to support parks get doubled. We have these issues and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own, and I am joined by David Croman of the Seattle Times. And David, great to see you as always. And stop the presses on this one. I think I just saw that your gardening exploits now include caring for chickens. What's going on, man?
Yeah, well, our friends were moving and they had to get rid of 3 chickens and 2 ducks. And so I am now the proud owner of a small flock of birds.
Oh, that's awesome, man. And protecting them from the local fauna seems like a bit of an issue. Coyotes, or what do you got out there?
Yeah, there's a lot of coyotes where we are, and so they're caged up right now, but for their own safety. But they're all laying right now, so we've already.
Oh, that's awesome! I know you're into those duck eggs, man. I can't wait to hear what happens next on that one. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks also to our listeners. We have a lot of you out there. We really thank you, and we also thank City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Catch them on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our patrons. We'd love to have more of you on board, folks. Thanks to Callie from a couple of weeks ago who jumped in at the $10 level. And if you do jump in at that level, we will send you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug and feature your photo on the mugshot of the week. Throwback this week to Eric, who sent us a mugshot in a chicken coop, one of the best we've ever done here. And David, if you're ever looking for another way to feed chickens, you can always use your Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. So if you do listen, please do support the show at any level. That's Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Finally, thanks to Converge Media, the video of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday evenings at 7. All right, we're going to get her going with right here, right now. Well, this week, the search for a new police chief here in Seattle starts up in earnest. 2 public forums moderated by the mayor's office to get public input. Tuesday up at North Seattle Community College. Saturday at Rainier Beach Community Center down south. So the mayor says he's looking for a leader who will, quote, engage the community, drive changes, and support a new 3rd public safety department. And I want to pick that apart a bit with you here, David, because I look at this search as part of a delicate balancing act. On one hand, I see that the mayor is pushing really hard. We talked about this last week to promote a new police hiring incentives plan, something that might attract candidates towards what I'm guessing he hopes will be a strong, growing department, at least have that image. But he's also trying to respond to this idea that a new chief will support and potentially take a role in the development of a 3rd public safety department. I just wanted your thoughts on that. What do you make of what the mayor says he's looking for in an SPD chief candidate?
Well, it's a tall task. In some ways it kind of requires an endorsement of moving some law enforcement activities into a different department, which I think, at least in some echelons of law enforcement, might kind of rub them the wrong way, and
sure, so it's their jobs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. At the same time, of course, they're understaffed, and you talk to a lot of police and they will freely admit that they do a lot of things that they feel like maybe they don't need to be doing. But, it is still sort of an endorsement of, it's not exactly defund the police, but it is sort of an endorsement of alternatives to the police. And that, that's kind of an interesting position to take. I think that the job of finding that kind of unicorn police chief right now is going to be hard no matter what. And then especially in a place like Seattle, where there's clearly a lot of conflict between how City Hall is run and particularly the rank and file union of the police department. Mm-hmm. And taking the job of police chief, you are, I think in some ways it's one of the harder political jobs in the city.
Big time. Mm-hmm.
Because you're answering to the mayor who hired you, who is answering to a fairly progressive voting base, but also you're the boss of more than 1,000 police employees who often clash pretty hard with your other boss, the mayor. And so,
Right.
it's never. There's a reason why we don't see police chiefs stick around in the city for decades
Yeah.
or whatever,
Yeah.
because it's a job that I think pulls you in a lot of different directions and it
Right.
takes a lot of skill to manage that.
Right. Yeah. And then throw the Seattle City Council in that political mix,
Yeah.
too. And it's interesting because I heard from Council Member Andrew Lewis this week on Council Edition. You can check it out on Seattle Channel. He's really trying to separate these ideas of we need police hiring bonuses and we need to develop new responses to calls that don't need sworn officers. And he's the vice chair of the Public Safety Committee. It was interesting to hear that. But I'm trying to get through on this idea of, okay, we have this emergency. We need to stop the bleeding and attract more officers very quickly. Need to do that first, and then we'll work on this alternative response concept that the Seattle City Council is so hot on. So I guess with the 911 times escalating as they are for the SPD right now, and a rise in gun violence out there here in Seattle, around the country too, I should point out, it's kind of like this is the natural reaction. We need to kind of double down on police. We really need to get more officers out on the street. I just think of that in comparison to a couple years ago, where this whole idea that more police didn't necessarily mean more public safety. I see these ideas struggling with each other.
I think that the sort of nature of movements, which I think we can confidently call what happened in the summer of 2020 a movement. Yeah. I think the kind of nature of them is they start with a fairly simple and blunt demand, and that's in some ways how it has to be, because you can't turn thousands of people out to a protest with a bill, highly nuanced bill or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you kind of start with the blunt and then try and nuance and
shoot for the moon and then come on back. I think I see what you're saying.
But I think in a place like this that's so sensitive, which is law enforcement and public safety, we're seeing that maybe it's a little harder to do that because you've sort of got yourself on the record saying one thing, and not everyone is willing to kind of give you the benefit of the doubt to allow you to nuance later. Progressive Seattle might not like me saying this. In some ways, this is sort of what Mayor Jenny Durkin was saying in the summer of 2020, which was we have to first, she never endorsed defund the police. She never endorsed cutting police budgets. Her argument was, let's build up these alternatives and then ratchet down the need for police.
Yep.
And so now we're kind of seeing the Seattle City Council do that in some ways, and much to the chagrin, I think, of the protesters who demanded that they see immediate cuts to the police department.
Right.
But also, I think the last election was fairly clear.
Oh yeah.
Bruce Harrell, Lorena Gonzalez could never get out from underneath the fact that she had endorsed defunding the police, and Bruce Harrell was unambiguous in his rejection of that and his his need to, or his desire rather, to hire more police officers, and he won by a huge margin. And so I think that was probably a huge wake-up call to the Seattle City Council that while there was a large number of people calling for immediate cuts to the police department, it did not prove to be a winning issue at the ballot on a local level.
No. Real quickly on this, just to wrap up the whole topic of police, I wanted to talk about the health of the department and not just the numbers. I mean, clearly those are in decline. More than 100 officers leaving over the course of this year is what Interim Chief Diaz is saying. But I'm looking at these different reports from the OPA, the CPC, these different civilian watchdog agencies that are overlooking the SPD. And they actually have a few reports and presentations that they're showing the Seattle City Council this week in the Public Safety Committee. Are you? I'm looking at the kind of the health of the department in terms of, are they doing the right thing when it comes to responding with the ruses that we've heard about before that they used during the protests of 2020? Are they doing the right thing when it comes to use of force and use of force complaints? Because I know the CPC is saying, SPD is not giving us all the data here. The health of the department in that way, David, do you have a feel for that?
I don't, admittedly, because I don't read, I used to read all the monitors reports and things like that come out. Being on the transportation beat, I don't read those reports quite as often as I used to. So no matter what, there is still a lot of scar tissue from how the police department handled the protests.
Yeah.
We saw in a lot of ways kind of years of plotting incremental sort of effort to improve under a consent decree. A lot of that goodwill, I think, among a good portion of Seattle was wiped out fairly quickly because of how they handled those protests. And then, of course, with that comes more scrutiny. And then and then of course, there are questions about how well the city's sort of accountability system actually works.
Exactly. Right.
I don't have a great sense of what is actually happening within the police department, but from a public perception standpoint, I do still think the police department, I think they are, they have more leverage now than they used to because of the rising crime numbers, public safety concerns. But at the same time, I do still think there's a sense that they need to kind of earn back respect of a large portion of the city.
Yep. I'll tell you what, moving on here, if you think heading to a forum to find a new police chief sounds fun, well, the excitement ain't stopping. Even more town halls coming your way on the future of the Seattle Park District, the Metropolitan Park District, the first one hosted by Councilmember Lewis at the Queen Anne Community Center on Thursday, and more to come this summer. Check out his website for info there. And a quick refresher course here, folks. Seattle voted to establish a park district, a separate taxing authority for our park system back in 2014, and all the city council members serve as its directors. So what's on the table right now? Well, possibly a doubling of this tax we now pay to maintain and support our parks. Median homeowner pays about $155 right now. This proposal would push that to just over $300. And why is this? Just some more background here, folks. Parks and Rec says from the big climate events we've seen the past few years to the pandemic to the protests of 2020, our parks have really been pushed to the limit. It's time to invest. I'm looking at this, David, and I get it in terms of what the parks are going through right now. But also, I've heard some of these criticisms from people like Councilmember Alex Peterson, who's saying, wait a minute, we got a lot of levies that are going to need to be raised or are already raised for education out there, for affordable housing. Move Seattle, we're talking about, for transportation that's going to be up in a couple years. How big of a political lift is it, or will it be, I guess, for Seattle City Council members as Park District Commissioners to raise taxes for parks? What do you think?
My baseline on property tax levies is until one actually fails, I'm going to assume they all will pass.
Yeah, right.
So far, I've been a reporter in Seattle since late 2014, and so far that has worked for me. Every time a levy comes up, we of course have this discussion, and I think it's worth having this discussion about. Of course, property taxes. You want accountability, and you want to be sure you're going to get something out of it. And so far, that kind of levy fatigue has not shown up yet. Housing levy passed, with huge numbers. Last time, and so when it comes to parks, I have a really hard time seeing that not passing by fairly large margins. The education levy in 18 passed with huge numbers.
Right.
I do think that the place where this is going to warrant the most discussion is around the Move Seattle levy and transportation, because that was so big and so underwhelming in a lot of ways that it did not deliver on a lot of what it said it was going to do. And so some real questions there. That hasn't, with the parks, of course there's a lot of work to do and there's a lot of backlog maintenance, but there has not been the same level of level of frustration, I don't think, in City Hall that under-delivered. And so my assumption, like I said, eventually I will be proven wrong, I think. But until I am, I'm just going to assume that they'll pass by fairly healthy margins.
I did want to point out, though, it's interesting with this plan. It brings me back to the library levy, which we have passed overwhelmingly over the past several years. But this park district has basically been separated out. It has its own taxing authority. And one item included in the presentation that the council is going through right now, the Board of Commissioners, using $10 million of the new revenue to go into the general fund. I think that's part of the conversation, too. And that's where, I don't know, it gets interesting. If parks are such a priority, then, well, shoot, why do we have all these levies to support them? Shouldn't that just be part of what we're taxed on as a regular government?
Yeah, I wasn't around when they made the decision to create this kind of special district.
The Metropolitan Park District. Sally Bagshaw was a proponent.
Or maybe it was right before I started reporting. I remember there being some discussion about it. I mean, I think the idea was you kind of create this untouchable pot of money that we as a city, Seattle has great parks. Everybody loves Seattle's parks, and I think it's a big reason why a lot of people live here. And so the idea at the time was you create this kind of special untouchable pot of money that in bad times you can't just raid the parks funds to pay for other things, and so you guarantee that you kind of always have funding for parks. So I think that was a discussion that was kind of had and finished. I don't know if there would be any consideration of kind of, I mean, in this discussion, we're seeing some of those lines being blurred a little bit, which is certainly interesting. I don't know. I mean, I just think I see this being a really popular issue in Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
Of how big and robust and beautiful the parks are. That I'm sure there's going to be like little things like this that come up and are tough issues, and the council's going to want to deal with. But in the end, again, I just have a hard time seeing this not moving forward.
No, people love their parks like they love their libraries. It's an interesting civic discussion to have, though. And thank you for breaking down those pieces with me. All right. Well, here we go, talking about taxes and how they're going to get rated this budget season, possibly. May I present to you the Jumpstart tax on big businesses? We'll have more on how it's doing and what this means for affordable housing in Seattle next on Now Hear This. Well, big news for the city of Seattle emerging late last week. The city will spend about $80 million to build or restore more than 1,700 units of affordable rental housing, thanks to revenue from the city's new Jumpstart payroll tax. Remember, this tax, passed by the council in 2020, requires businesses that spend at least $7 million on payroll annually to pay a tax on employees who make at least $150,000 a year. Here's how excited Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda was, the sponsor of Jumpstart, at a press conference last week.
We are celebrating those dollars going into community and building homes, building units, building a sense of joy and pride and respect for people to call home. You all made this possible, and it is my privilege to be able to work in partnership with you to make Jumpstart a reality in Seattle.
David, I played that soundbite there because it really felt like a campaign rally, and maybe with some good reason, because also last week, the Metro Chamber of Commerce dropped its lawsuit that was fighting against Jumpstart. It just felt like this was the kind of announcement Councilmember Mosqueda has been anxious to make for a long time. And I just really thought it was big news that the chamber was dropping its suit.
Yeah, I agree. You think back to 2017 with the original kind of, quote, head tax. And what people were talking about that for years. And it was this like seen as this kind of symbol of council incompetence. And it just became this like huge cudgel for the Chamber of Commerce. So to fast forward to now, where not only is Teresa Mosqueda out there celebrating the investments of a tax that is much larger than that original head tax, but that the Chamber of Commerce has now just given up. I mean, this is the end. This is the city council has won this fight after 5 years of, and it turns out, when you start bringing in money, people are fairly happy to spend that money and to take that money. So even someone like now Mayor Bruce Harrell, who he voted in favor of the original head tax, but was also one of the people to vote to repeal it and had always been a little more hesitant than some of the progressive people. Now you get this fight where like the mayor wants to take some of the money and spend it to backfill what's going to be a budget deficit in the general fund. And so suddenly you go from this massive fight over whether they should be doing this at all to people fighting over who gets to actually spend this money. And the chamber itself kind of realizing, I think, that, when it comes to taxing rich people and large corporations, it is basically a pretty popular idea in Seattle. I mean, there's a lot of controversy in how the Seattle City Council has rolled this out early on and that sort of thing. But when it comes down to it, even sort of representatives of the, quote, more moderate, consultants who helped out the kind of, quote, more moderate Seattle City Council people run their campaigns will say the progressive side of Seattle City Hall is at its strongest when it's hammering on this. We want to tax rich corporations to build housing. I mean, it's a fairly simple message. And I think this announcement, combined with the fact that the chamber has decided to drop its suit, just goes to show that in Seattle, that is not support of a tax like this is no longer a political liability, and it's in fact probably a political boon.
Yeah, no, I just remember how Mike O'Brien, who was a council member a few years ago, brought this idea up in 2013, something like this, starting to bring this through the city council. He was reviled for it, but now it's having some big success. And like you say, it's bringing in more revenue than was originally thought. It was supposed to bring in about $200 million, something like that. Looks like it's created $231 million in new revenue. So Mayor Durkin's budget from last year, this is where it gets a little wonky, but here we go. That budget used one-time federal money to basically pay for some of the things Jumpstart was supposed to pay for, which has kind of left the Harrell administration and the council in a bind. it's replacing those one-time dollars without making it look like a cut. So as much joy as there was with Jumpstart, and we saw that from Councilmember Mosqueda and a number of advocates last week, it's also created this really interesting budget battleground, I think, for the mayor and the city council coming up here this fall.
Yeah, which is actually similar to how it was last year too. The Mayor Jenny Durkin and the council kind of got into this a little bit. Also, again, there's money to be had, and it's it wouldn't be politics if various branches weren't fighting over who and how gets
and raiding each other. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sort of one more addendum to what I was saying before about why this has suddenly become ingrained and as popular as it is. I think that the pandemic did a lot for people's support of taxing Amazon. The fact that as the rest of the world was sort of locking down and worried about massive recessions and there was a ton of unemployment, the fact that Amazon's profits just soared through this, suddenly it was really hard for anyone to really feel all that much sympathy for a corporation like Amazon.
Right.
And I think that also kind of changed the dynamic quite a bit. That the argument that Amazon was making in 2017 that they would start, moving people out of Seattle, just suddenly didn't carry that much weight because people were looking at these balance sheets and how much money Amazon was making during the pandemic and saying, that argument just did not hold the same kind of water. There are certain benefits to being a reporter in the city for a while. And one of them is watching how quickly some issues can turn from totally toxic to, basically a political, a thing that they're willing to celebrate publicly and run campaigns on.
Yeah, on all sides of the political spectrum, for sure. Well, I wanted to move on to one other issue here with you, David. I mentioned at the top of the show, the Seattle City Council is working on several ways to protect a woman's right to have an abortion in our state, even if she's coming across state lines. And last week, we saw Council members Morales and Herbold talking about protecting abortion access here. And this week, we're learning more about a measure from Councilmember Shama Sawant up for a vote on Tuesday that would make Seattle a sanctuary city for abortion. So this measure from Sawant would direct the SPD and city attorney's office not to cooperate with out-of-state law enforcement investigating women who might be trying to get an abortion. And it would also require the SPD and the CAO to record any requests from law enforcement for assistance from states where abortion is banned. And I think about this in light of that law in Texas that basically sets a bounty out there, allowing private citizens to sue for people seeking abortions out of state, what places like Seattle are doing. But when you start bringing in the local city attorney and the police into the mix, which I guess you kind of have to do here, what sort of complexity does this create? And what sort of coalitions are being formed here between Councilmember Sawant, the SPD, the city attorney's office? This is a really interesting issue.
It is an interesting issue. I'd be curious to know if it ever becomes relevant or not. I genuinely don't know. I mean, I have no sense of, I don't know that anyone really knows how aggressively states like Idaho
are going to go after it. Yeah.
Will go after its own citizens who might fly to Seattle. Seattle's not really alone in doing this. The state has also, and Attorney General have also said that, they wouldn't cooperate with investigations or do anything in extradition or whatever. I would just be very curious to know if this ever becomes relevant. The only other sort of similar thing I can think of was maybe around 2016 after Donald Trump was elected president. Seattle became a quote sanctuary city for undocumented immigrants.
That's right.
The difference there, though, and Washington State kind of did the same. The difference there, though, is at the time, at least Washington State, and I think to a lesser extent Seattle also, there was already some relationship with immigration. That was the thing that was going on, and it was legitimately happening that there was exchanging of information between local law enforcement and federal immigration law enforcement. And, that was kind of more impactful in that they were stopping, instructing people to stop doing something that they would occasionally do. This is a new thing. There's until recently, abortion was constitutionally protected. And so, of course, there is no current relationship now in which law enforcement is helping investigate people who get abortions. So, which is all to say, I just have no sense of, how much would ever come into play, whether they would help out in the first place. And I don't know that anyone really knows that.
No, I've seen some comparisons too to back in the 1860s in the Underground Railroad, people seeing slaves go to different states and what's it going to be like as our as states fight each other over these different abortion laws. But it's definitely something that we're going to be tracking over the next several months. And all right, well, up next, what needs to happen in the Soto neighborhood to make it safer for people who aren't driving a car or truck? Some big concerns there. David's got the details on Transportation Talk. David, you wrote recently in the Seattle Times about a much-needed makeover for the Soto neighborhood, specifically on 4th Avenue South when it comes to traffic issues happening there. What's going on?
Well, Soto has Soto and Council District 2 more broadly have been correctly identified as particularly unsafe places for people to walk and ride their bicycles. I think it was since 2021, something like 60% of traffic deaths have occurred in Council District 2. And there's this kind of specific area in South Seattle near Holgate, 4th and Holgate, 3rd and Holgate, 4th and Massachusetts, where it has proven to be particularly dangerous for people who are on bicycles. And also, people driving cars too and walking. So, just this year, two bikers have been killed near that area, one at 4th and Holgate, another at 3rd and Holgate. I think this is, I don't want to oversell what this is. This is not some sort of radical reshaping of all of Soto. But what's interesting about it, they're basically proposing banning some left-hand turns and putting in a kind of medium in the middle of the road and trying to slow turns, sort of things that can be done relatively quickly without tearing up a lot of concrete. And so, it's hard to know, how much of a difference this will make, but it is interesting because we've been hearing, especially from Councilmember Morales, the kind of louder beating of the drum that the city needs to pay more attention to traffic deaths, and specifically traffic deaths in South Seattle and Council District 2 and Soto. And so, projects tend to take a long time in Seattle. There's a lot of process, the Seattle process. We know about that. This is an example, though, at least for now. I mean, things could change, of course, where they are functioning on, at least for SDOT, what is a fairly aggressive timeline to make some changes down there. And so for me, it kind of raises the question of, is the dam on some of this stuff going to start breaking, or are we going to see more of these kind of quick turn, quote, rapid response changes to some of the city's most dangerous places?
Interesting. And then interesting also to see what will happen this budget process as more investments are made. I know there's a lot of call for more investments in the South End. So thanks for that piece there, David. I wanted to wrap up by asking you something. Now, I know you listened and read the story from one of your colleagues here, Christine Claridge, writing about line cutters in the state ferry system. I know you use the ferries a lot. And folks, I don't know if David's going to turn into the Incredible Hulk here, but I get the feeling we wouldn't like it when he's angry. This stuff really ticks you off, man. What's going on?
Well, I mean, the stakes on it are like, I think, if someone cuts you in the grocery store line, it's a little annoying, but it just means you wait an extra 90 seconds or whatever.
Sure.
If somebody cuts you, I have been on many boats where I'm the last car on the boat, or many times I have been the first car to not get on the boat. And when you're racing for a ferry, you are looking at the app and I've literally counted cars and tried to figure out if I'm going to get on this boat. And so one car cutting you is the difference, can screw up your entire day. It is. It's as Christine wrote, it's a blood boiling thing to see. It's the only place where I become an endorser of the, nanny state of snitching on your neighbors.
That's right. I know. And now we don't have 684 Hero to lean on anymore, but at least that was a place for people to vent about it. This is rough, man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, bring it back down, man. Calm it back down. Find that happy place if you can. David, thank you as always. And I'm glad that we were able to keep you calm for the better part of the podcast here, as always. Thank you. Thanks to everybody listening at Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on all the major platforms. And once again, if you are a listener, please do support the show on Patreon. Thanks for watching on Converge, too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.